You know that feeling, right? You get your paycheck, you pay the bills, and you're just left wondering, where did it all go? Why doesn't your money seem to stretch as far as it used to? So, in this explainer, we're going to unpack all of that. We'll start with the basics. What even is the cost of living? Then we'll see how it's measured, how your paycheck is supposed to adjust, and what it all looks like on a global scale. Okay, first up, what exactly is the cost of living? Simply put, it's about what it takes, financially, to maintain a certain standard of living. So, to get a bit more specific, it's the total amount of money you need to cover all those essential expenses, whether you're living solo or supporting a whole family. It's really the baseline for what we call a normal life. And what are those essentials? Well, we're talking about the big ones. Things like housing, obviously, the food you put on the table, the energy you use for heating and lights, how you get around, transportation, and even things like personal care items, the fundamental building blocks of our daily expenses. All right, that makes sense, but how do we actually know if things are getting more expensive? How do economists and governments keep track of all these rising costs? Well, the primary tool for this job is something called the Consumer Price Index, or CPI for short. This is a big deal. You can think of it as the official scorecard for inflation, tracking the average change in prices for all the stuff we buy. So how in the world does that actually work? It's based on this really cool idea of a basket of goods. Imagine statisticians creating a big shopping list of all the common things people buy. Milk, gas, clothes, you name it. Then they meticulously track the prices of everything on that list over time. The overall price change of that entire basket, that's how we get our inflation number. And this is a really key distinction to make. The CPI is just the measurement. It's the thermometer telling us how hot things are getting. But what do we do about it? That's where COLA comes into play. COLA is the action we take based on what that CPI measurement tells us. Which, of course, brings us to the next big question. How are our paychecks supposed to keep up with all this? That action is called a cost of living adjustment, or COLA, and it's exactly what it sounds like. It's a raise or an increase in your income, whether that's from Social Security, a pension, or your salary, that's specifically designed to cancel out the effects of inflation. The whole point is to make sure your money can buy the same amount of stuff this year as it did last year. But, not every country handles this the same way. Take the US, for example. Social Security COLAs are calculated annually at most. But if you look at our neighbors in Canada, their old age security gets adjusted every quarter. That can make a huge difference because it's much more responsive to sudden price jumps. And here's a stat that really drives home the long-term power of these adjustments. A Canadian pension fund did the math. A $20,000 pension that started way back in 1995 would actually grow to over $37,000 by 2025, all thanks to those consistent COLAs. That's an 87% jump over 3 decades just to keep up. But of course, the cost of living isn't just about how prices change over time. It's also hugely about where you are. So let's zoom out a bit and look at how costs can be wildly different around the world. So, how can you possibly compare the cost of living in, say, Sydney versus Singapore? Well, organizations like the Economist Intelligence Unit do these massive global surveys. They compare over 400 prices for more than 160 different products and services to create a single index score for each city. So, if we set New York City as our baseline, let's call it 100, we can see how other major cities compare. Looking at data from 2017, for instance, Sydney was already a bit pricier. And Singapore, it was way up there, ranking as one of the most expensive cities on the planet. It's a perfect illustration of just how much your location can impact your wallet. Okay, so what happens when that gap gets too big? When the cost of living starts rising way faster than our incomes can possibly keep up? Well, that leads us to the very real, very human impact of this problem. This is when we start hearing the term cost of living crisis. And it's not just about things getting a little more expensive. We're talking about a sharp, painful rise in costs that completely eats away at your purchasing power. A lifestyle that felt totally normal and affordable before suddenly feels impossible to maintain. And when you dig into the why, a lot of research points to one major factor. The 2022 World Inequality Report, which was a huge 4-year project, pinpointed extreme wealth inequality as a major driver behind all this pressure. And some of the numbers in that report are just wow. For starters, it found that the top 10%, the wealthiest tenth of the world's population, owns a staggering 76% of all the wealth on the planet. Now hold that number in your head and compare it to this one.
The entire bottom half of the world's population, we're talking billions of people, they collectively own just 2% of global wealth. The gap between those two numbers is just enormous.
And this isn't just about numbers on a page. It has heartbreaking, real-world consequences. We're talking about people having to make impossible choices, like skipping prescribed medication because they can't afford it. It means incredible stress on families just trying to cover housing and utility bills. And it means less and less money left over for, well, anything else.
And all of this really leaves us with a huge question to grapple with. In an era of constantly rising costs, what does a fair and decent standard of living even mean anymore? What should we expect?